Hark, I am called Jessica, and a tale of yore I must unfold. A tale that may astonish some of you, and perchance lead others to ponder the choices I have made. Yet this be my verity. It is a secret I have long concealed, and at last, I have resolved to unveil the truth. Pray, allow me to commence by declaring that, verily, this is not a fanciful narrative of outrageous conduct or salacious intrigue. This tale unfolds the intricate dance of affection and solitude, revealing how a seemingly innocent bond spiraled into chaos. Allow me to transport thee to the very beginning. Mine own spouse, Richard, and I have been united in matrimony for nearly 10 years. Our paths did cross when we were both newly emerged from the halls of learning. He possessed a fervent ambition, a captivating charm, and was the sort of gentleman who could enter any chamber and command the gaze of all present in a mere heartbeat. With fervent passion, I found myself enraptured by his charm, and the nascent days of our union unfolded like a tale spun from the finest threads of romance. It was most exquisite. Time hath sped forth, and lo, life hath lost its once flawless visage. Richard's endeavors led him to wander far from his hearth more frequently than not. His vocation was most arduous, and he found himself perennially journeying for matters of commerce, gatherings of intellect, and the forging of alliances. Though I grasped the significance of his craft, the void weighed heavily upon the bonds of our union. We did drift apart, scarcely exchanging words for stretches of time, and when we did converse, it was oft but a mere dalliance upon the surface of discourse. Pray tell, how did the hours unfold for thee? And what sustenance dost thou prepare for our evening repast? Yet, beneath the facade, a profound solitude did dwell within me. In my heart, a yearning stirred for the warmth of companionship, a soul to bridge the chasm that Richard had unwittingly carved within my existence. It was then that the tides began to shift. In a tranquil and serene abode, we resided upon a humble farm, nestled beyond the bustling confines of the city. Among the many charms that beckoned us to this abode was the ample expanse and the chance to tend to creatures of the earth. We possessed a handful of fowl, a pair of caprine creatures, and, naturally, our noble steed named Midnight. In the stillness of night, there stood a magnificent black stallion, strong and noble, whose gentle spirit seemed to grasp the depths of human emotion more keenly than many a soul. Mine heart hath ever cherished steeds, and Midnight was of a rare and singular nature. He was a token bestowed by Richard to mark the 5th year of our union, a sign of his affection. Despite his frequent absences, in the weary hours of solitude, whilst Richard was absent, Midnight emerged as my solace and refuge. In the quietude of the stable, I would linger for countless hours, tending to him with gentle strokes, engaging in soft discourse, and simply relishing the warmth of his company. It may seem peculiar, I grant you, yet creatures possess an uncanny ability to perceive when thou art in pain. In the stillness of the night, a presence would oft reveal itself, sensing the weight of my sorrow or vexation. With a tender nudge, he would offer solace, as if to whisper, "Thou art not alone in thy plight." As time did wane, those cherished moments with Midnight did ascend to the pinnacle of my days. I discovered myself unburdening my soul to him, sharing secrets that I could not even confide to my spouse. The hour of midnight, steadfast and unyielding, bore no scorn and remained ever present. It seemed as though he had transformed into the solace for my heart that I had long sought. Pray, ponder not upon the folly of such a comparison, for how might one draw parallels twixt a noble steed and the man I call my own? Yet thou must comprehend that Richard was not present, and Midnight was all that remained to me. The fateful moment arrived on a balmy eve of summer. Richard, as is oft his wont, was absent from our midst, and I found myself ensnared in a melancholy state. Upon concluding my discourse with him, I was once more struck by the sensation that we were but two wayfarers, traversing distinct paths, each ensconced in our own solitary existence. I ventured forth to the stable, yearning to discover solace in the company of Midnight. As I didst brush his coat, I began to converse with him, as was my custom, yet this occasion bore a distinct air of novelty. In a moment of lamentation, I found myself expressing the depths of my vexations, the weight of solitude, and the chasm that lay betwixt Richard and my heart. as I meandered through my thoughts, scarcely aware of the words that flowed from my lips. A sudden epiphany struck me. I spoke of midnight with such fervor that my heart quickened in response. I found myself in a moment of folly, shook my head in disbelief, and dismissed it with a hearty laugh. Jessica, thou art being most absurd. I chided myself. At the stroke of midnight, there stood a steed, a creature of grandeur, indeed, yet merely a steed. I endeavored to cast aside the peculiar musings that had begun to infiltrate my thoughts. Yet as the sun did rise and set, I discovered myself drawn to the stable with increasing frequency, tarrying longer than was wise, and feeling an inexplicable bond with midnight that stirred within my heart. A weight of remorse did burden my soul. How could it be that my heart was so entwined with a creature of fur when I was bound in union with a man? Yet, the harder I endeavored to cast it aside, the more potent the bond grew. Lo, the hour of midnight doth ever linger in the shadows. And Richard, verily, Richard was not so. Verily, I must confess, my actions were not of the nature thou might presume. There existed not a betrayal of flesh, nor a dalliance in the customary manner. Yet, in matters of the heart, I had ventured beyond the bounds. In the shadows of my heart, I found myself sharing secrets with midnight, secrets that ought to have been entrusted solely to my beloved spouse. Then, on a fateful eve, all that was built did crumble into ruin. Richard didst return home unheralded from one of his journeys. Unbeknownst to me, his arrival went unnoticed, for I was ensconced in the stable, as is my custom, in the company of midnight. Unbeknownst to me, the hours slipped away, and I found myself ensnared in this peculiar bond of sentiment. As Richard did enter the stable, he beheld me beside midnight, murmuring tenderly to the noble steed. Alas, I remained blind to Richard's presence until the hour was nigh upon me. What dost thou engage in? Richard's voice did pierce the air, laden with a tempest of bewilderment and distrust. His gaze flitted betwixt me and midnight, as though he sought to unravel the tableau laid before him. I stood still, my heart thundering within my breast. Words eluded me in that moment. How might I articulate this without appearing mad? Richard lingered before me, his gaze fixed, as he awaited an elucidation that eluded my grasp. How might I commence to elucidate the tempest of feelings in which I found myself ensnared? The stillness within the stable seemed to extend into eternity, interrupted solely by the gentle snorts of midnight, blissfully ignorant of the tempest that had recently descended upon the land. Jessica, prithee, what mischief dost thou find thyself entangled in? Richard inquired once more, his tone a tempest of bewilderment and ire. He advanced with measured intent, his gaze sharpening as though he sought to unravel the mystery before him. I did withdraw, my hand resting upon midnight's flank, as though he might serve as a bulwark against the impending clash that loomed before us. Thou dost not perceive the matter as it truly is, Richard. I faltered in my speech, uncertain of his thoughts yet to be revealed. How might he articulate the spectacle before him when I scarcely grasped it myself? He didst shake his head, manifestly not persuaded. Pray, enlighten me. Forsooth, I returned to our abode at an hour most early, only to discover thee in quiet communion with our steed, as if he were. Verily, I find myself in a state of confusion. What thoughts dost thou expect me to entertain? I drew in a breath profound, seeking the eloquence to articulate the bond I had forged with midnight, striving to avoid the semblance of utter madness. Richard, thou hast been absent for many a day of late. I commenced, and I could already perceive the vexation mounting within his gaze. Verily, I comprehend that thou art bound by duty, and I see the toil thou dost endure for our sake. Yet, a sense of solitude doth weigh heavily upon my heart. And lo, midnight hath been a steadfast companion to me. He hath lent his ear when none other didst remain. He raised his hands in a fit of vexation. He is a steed, dear Jessica. Thou dost speak as if he were a mortal being. I didst flinch at his utterance, yet I could not refute the truth of his claim. Verily, I did murmur, yet he did stand in thy absence. In my solitude, I found myself drawn to him, for there was no other soul to engage with. Alas, it spiraled beyond my control. Richard gazed upon me, his countenance a tapestry woven with threads of disbelief and sorrow. What mattereth it? Pray tell. Dost thou imply that thine heart hath wandered in a most peculiar liaison with a steed? The utterances struck me as ludicrous. Yet the truth of the matter was not as improbable as it appeared. It was never my intent for such a fate to befall us. I spoke in hushed tones, as tears began to gather in mine eyes. Alas, dear Richard, I found myself in a state of profound solitude. In my hour of need, when solitude weighed heavy upon my heart, there stood midnight, a steadfast companion ready to lend an ear. He did shake his head once more, manifestly wrestling with the tumult of thoughts that besieged his mind. Pray, what dost thou convey unto me? That thou dost hold affection for him? That thou wouldst prefer his company over mine? His voice did tremble, and I discerned that beneath the fury lay a profound sense of treachery. Nay, verily not, I did respond with haste, advancing forth and extending my hand towards his. My heart doth belong to thee, Richard, yet I found myself in solitude. And thus I erred. My passions did overwhelm my reason, and I sought solace in the shadows when I ought to have sought your light. He withdrew his hand, striding to and fro within the confines of the modest stable. This is most extraordinary. Verily, I find myself at a loss, unable to fathom the depths of this conundrum. Upon my return, lo and behold, what dost mine eyes behold? My beloved spouse hath revealed a most peculiar entanglement of the heart with our noble steed? There I remained, a mere spectator to my own plight, beset by uncertainty on how to mend the dire straits that lay before me. Pray, Richard, I beseech thee, it was not thus. I engaged not in any corporeal act, nor did I partake in any manner deemed improper. Alas, I find myself adrift in the depths of solitude. Forsooth, in that fleeting instant, he uttered not a word. There he stood, his form averted from my gaze, as he endeavored to gather the scattered fragments of his mind. At last, he did utter his words. Pray, dost thou comprehend the madness of this, Jessica? How absurd this entire circumstance doth appear. I did acquiesce, mine utterance scarcely rising above a breath. Verily, I am aware, yet 'tis the truth that stands before us. In the shadows of solitude, I allowed my discernment to wane, and for that, I express my regret. Never did I intend for matters to reach such a point. Richard didst turn to face me, his countenance softening but a little. Pray, why didst thou not engage in discourse with me? Pray, why didst thou not confide in me thy troubled heart? I endeavored, I proclaimed, my voice quaking with emotion. Yet, each time I ventured to speak of it, thou wert ever occupied, or wearied, or simply lost in thought. And in the end, I surrendered. I did muse that perchance this was the manner in which fate had decreed all to unfold. Thus did I discover solace in the hour of midnight, and I perceive that this may seem absurd. Yet he stood by me in a manner that thou didst not. With a deep sigh, he ran his fingers through his tresses, burdened by the weight of his thoughts. Thou hast kept thy sentiments hidden from mine eyes. Upon reflection, I believed our state was one of harmony. We were not, I answered with a gentle tone. Yet, I wished not to lay this weight upon thy shoulders. Thou wert ever so occupied with thy labors, and I wished not to appear as one in want of attention. Yet verily, the essence of my heart doth reveal. I sought thee, Richard. I found myself in need of my beloved spouse, and in thy absence, I found myself cloaked in the shadows of night. A lengthy hush enveloped us as we lingered in that moment, each lost in thought. The gravity of the circumstance doth settle upon the heart. At last, Richard did utter his words once more. His voice, now a gentle whisper, caressed the air with tender grace. Alas, dear Jessica, I find myself in a quandary, uncertain of the path to tread with this matter. Alas, I find myself at a crossroads, uncertain of the path that lies ahead. I drew in a breath profound, as the tears did cascade forth upon my visage. Nor do I confessed. Yet I yearn to mend this plight. I yearn to mend our bond. My heart doth cherish thee, and I fear not to part from thy side. Richard gazed upon me, his eyes brimming with a tumultuous blend of anguish and doubt. Verily, my affection for thee, Jessica, doth mirror thine own. Yet, verily, this endeavor shall require a measure of time. I didst nod, comprehending the weight of the circumstance. I am aware, and I am prepared to undertake any endeavor necessary to restore harmony." He let out a weary breath once more, drawing nearer to my presence. "We must engage in discourse regarding this matter. Pray, speak truly, concerning all matters, not merely the stroke of midnight, but the essence of our union, wherein we did err and how we might amend our course." I didst nod, extending mine hand once more to grasp his. This moment, sensing his grip return in kind. "Pray, I stand prepared to converse. Richard, I stand prepared to set matters aright." As we lingered in the stable, the atmosphere heavy with the gravity of our discourse, I came to understand that this marked the initial stride in mending what had been shattered. It would not prove a simple task, and it would not come to pass in the blink of an eye. Yet, for the first occasion in many a moon, a flicker of hope did stir within my breast. Perchance, in the realm of possibility, we might yet discover a path that leads us back to one another. Thus, Jessica and Richard embark upon the arduous journey of mending their union, striving to rekindle the bond that once united their hearts and to rediscover the affection that had initially drawn them near.